This is Tornado Talk, a podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenon. Share your tornado story with us by email, Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. That's Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. Now, meteorologists Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday. Tornado Talk is on.
When a large-scale tornado outbreak is underway, numerous lives are at risk. Officials at the National Weather Service work feverishly to protect the public.
You train so long and so many hours for these moments as a National Weather Service employee, thinking, well, my chance of seeing this in real life are actually pretty small. And then to actually see that in front of you, and it's not a simulation, it's live, and you've got to make decisions, and you've got to make quick decisions and communicate threats. It puts you in a whole different state of mind.
That is Seth Bonneau at the National Weather Service in Willington, Ohio. He and colleagues across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys had been tracking severe weather for hours on March 2nd, 2012.
A damaging EF4 had made its way through southern Indiana, over the Ohio River and into Kentucky. It would be the worst outbreak for southern Indiana since the late spring of 1990. Tornadoes would continue touching down into the nighttime hours and the early morning of March 3rd, 2012.
This is Tornado Talk, Madness in March Part 2. When the severe weather threat spread further east into Georgia, North Carolina, and eastern Kentucky, sirens wailed in a number of communities, sending residents running for cover.
Well, I cried when I started laying on the floor when the tornado was happening. I just started bawling my eyes out then, and I pretty much cried all the way through Saturday, yesterday. Today we're trying to make jokes and make a little bit light of the subject and go from there.
What they saw was a mass of black clouds coming across the river, skipping the river, and then blasting into this community, so that in minutes, a once vital community had really been hit hard. One of its leaders killed, its city hall, and several dozen more buildings, or 24 more buildings, destroyed.
Yeah, there was a lot of times you just stopped and shed a few tears and wondered why. But it's just, you had to deal with it. You had to grab it and make decisions and move forward.
Kim Cunningham, the co-host of the podcast Stormfront Freaks, was working at the Weather Channel in 2012, but March 2nd was her day off.
We were looking ahead and seeing that there was possibly going to be an outbreak towards the end of the week. And what I do remember is thinking that there were some similarities at that time of some of the upper level features, the fact that we're coming off of a Lanier winter, and that was similar to like the 74 outbreak. And to me, that's what got me into weather, was the 74 outbreak that hit Cincinnati. So when I saw things were kind of coming together for this outbreak, and everybody at the Weather Channel, we were really watching it closely. Dr. Forbes, of course, was on it. And, we saw conditions every day becoming more and more prevalent that there was going to be a severe weather event towards the end of the week. And I remember that there was a high-risk area for the Ohio Valley, and we were at a moderate risk in Georgia, in the Atlanta metro area. But most of the dynamics were going up towards the north. That seemed like that was going to be the worst of it. And some things that were similar, I remember showers coming through in the morning, even through Ohio, and that was similar to the 74 outbreak, where we had rain that morning and then got in the warm sector, had sunshine, and then later in the day with the cold front and the squall line, we got the supercells and tornadoes. So it was kind of setting up the same too. And I know it was really hot that day for March, and it might have been in the mid 70s, upper 70s. And I know later on in the day, I remember the dew points weren't as high as we thought they were going to be, but we were still going for severe weather in Georgia. But my focus at that time was what was going on in Indiana and Kentucky and Cincinnati, because my family lives in Cincinnati, and we were watching these storms. My mom and my sister and I were all on the phone talking about what's happening in Henryville. And then I remember I got the call from my sister late afternoon and said, oh my gosh, we've got debris falling out of the sky in Cincinnati. And the only thing we could attribute it to was the Henryville tornado to the southwest of Cincinnati that missed Cincinnati to the south. But I thought, wow, that's incredible. I've never heard of debris falling that far away from a tornado. So That was late afternoon, and we still had some storms off to our west. The cold front was still off to our west in Georgia.
A supercell thunderstorm spawned a tornado that did significant damage in Haralson and Paulding counties in Georgia. It was on the ground for nearly 29 miles, and it was rated an EF3. Kim Cunningham was watching the storm's every move that would eventually take it close to her back door.
And there was a tornado warning on it. It really took a nice hook shape on the radar, good couplet in velocities. Started getting reports that there was damage being done, and there was a debris signature on it, and it was tracking. They kept tracking. I remember watching. Everybody kept tracking it towards the northeast, and a lot of these supercells on that outbreak tracked more to the east versus northeast. And I thought, well, it's going to be close. It's going to be close. Now, my husband at that time was a sergeant for the Kennesaw Police Department, and he was out spotting. He had to work through this. So I was home alone with the 3 boys. And I will tell you this much, that it takes a lot for me to get my boys into our storm shelter. And it started hailing. It started raining really hard, and hail was mixing. I remember standing at the door thinking, okay, now we're in the hail core of it, thinking, okay, what's next? If this thing is heading towards the northeast, like they're saying, this could be right where, we live. So I was getting nervous. The first time I'd gotten really that nervous and anxious in many, many, many years. So we went in the basement into a closet that part of the closet is actually underground. Most of it's underground. The other part leads into a day part of the basement. They got nervous because they don't remember ever going to a storm shelter before. I thought, this one's too close. It's doing damage. So I put the kids in the closet and I said, stay here. And I went out and turned the TV on in the basement and was watching local meteorologists, and it did look like a weekend. So I went to the back door. All of a sudden, everything stopped. You couldn't hear a thing outside. I thought, oh no. So I went out the back door. I looked back to the back, and there were some flashes of lightning. I could see a lowering. And so I ran back in, went into the closet, and said, okay, kids, let's just, let's tell some jokes or whatever and try to get through it. And so then about 10, 15 minutes passed and nothing happened. So I climbed out of the closet and turned on the TV, and here it had missed us to the south and was producing, a weak tornado over in East Cobb County. For me, that it was too close for comfort, and I just knew what had happened earlier in the day with these violent tornadoes, and it just was a very scary thing. And don't forget, we were coming off of the 2011 April outbreak, and people were very sensitive to any kind of severe weather. So that's what I remember from that day.
Tornado warnings were being issued across multiple states. Watching a radar was a frightening sight as severe weather threatened one community after another. In Hamilton County, Tennessee, a powerful tornado was doing EF3 damage. It worried Tim Radford, who is the owner of WKRK in Murphy, North Carolina. His listeners were on edge following weather updates as the storms moved closer.
Another tornado touched down and was on the ground for over 14 miles through Monroe County, Tennessee. It crossed through Tellico Plains, causing EF2 damage. By late evening, a tornado moved through Cherokee County, North Carolina, and right into the town of Murphy. The twister knocked out power to WKRK radio. That's when Tim Radford and his team connected the community on Facebook.
Thanks to Facebook and people sharing the storm damage, it was just quite a sight to see. And here in the town of Murphy, there was a lot of places that the path happened that was residential, especially in a neighborhood called Texana, which is just to the north of the town of Murphy. Did quite a bit of damage there, passed over Texana, and actually did some damage to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. Once there, it passed from the Sheriff's Office, completely destroyed the Wayne's Feed Store. Doyle's Cedar Hill Restaurant. There were some people sitting there, dining there when the tornado was passing through. When just down the street from there, as the tornado continued, it damaged the Sherwin-Williams paint store. We have 3 shopping centers that were pretty close together, and the tornado did damage to all 3, and then headed up toward Peachtree, North Carolina, and destroyed some homes in that area. Quite a bit of damage, but again, we are thankful that no lives were lost on March 2nd as a result of that storm.
Following the storm that carved a path of damage through Murphy, North Carolina, Mayor Bill Hughes was asked how he felt after seeing what occurred.
Well, shocked, first of all, because as I said, we have encountered this before, but about 40 years ago. And I don't think anyone was really expecting this extent and degree of damage, so it was quite a shocking experience for everyone involved. Of course, any traumatic situation like this involving millions of dollars worth of property damage, it will certainly set you back.
Mayor Hughes said the northern part of his town was hardest hit. The tornado was rated an EF2 with winds of up to 120 miles per hour. It was on the ground for 21.5 miles.
Breaking weather warnings are initiated by a local National Weather Service office. In Wilmington, Ohio, they watch over 52 counties across southeastern Indiana, northern Kentucky, and southwest and central Ohio. What happened on March 2nd and 3rd, 2012 is etched into their minds. Meteorologist Scott Hickman had an eerie feeling about how the outbreak would unfold.
I had a premonition, if you want to call it, that Friday, March 2nd, was probably going to be a very interesting day, severe-wise, just based on the data that I had been looking at. And when I came in that morning, the Storm Prediction Center eventually put our area in a high risk for tornadoes, which doesn't happen that often in this part of the country.
Ken Haydu is the meteorologist in charge at the Wilmington, Ohio National Weather Service office.
When we saw the tornadoes that were actually hitting the ground in the areas to the west of us that day, your heart just sunk. It was like somebody reached their hand in your chest and just pulled it out. The emotions were running very, very high in the office that day. But the main focus that everybody was keeping is putting out those tornado warnings, making sure we did not miss any tornadoes, and then giving people as much lead time as possible to get ready. We hoped and we prayed that we weren't going to see in our area what was going on to the west.
Science and Operations Officer Seth Bonneau said the most catastrophic situation they face is a tornado emergency. He says it is carefully issued in the most extreme situations.
The tornado emergency is our ace in the back pocket. You just can't bring it out for any situation. It has to be the product, it has to be the warning where people say, my goodness, something is really different about this storm. We really need to take shelter or we're going to die. And once we started to hear the damage reports coming out of Louisville, in the circulations we saw on their radar, we knew it was a possibility that we'd have to issue tornado emergencies. But it wasn't until the Louisville office called us on the phone and said, we have a multiple vortex tornado on the ground in our county that's about to move into your county, that lined up with the circulation we were seeing on our radar, that I knew this is just the extension of the Henryville tornado. We've got no choice but to issue that tornado warning, that tornado emergency. So it became a very easy decision when we put together the circulations, the damage, and then the ground truth reports out of the Louisville area. There was no other product that fit that situation more than the tornado emergency, and so the actual decision to do so was very easy.
The supercell that caused major damage in Henryville, Indiana, was also responsible for destruction in Crittenden and Piner, Kentucky. National Weather Service meteorologist Andy Hatzos was tracking that storm.
This tornado developed extremely quickly from a supercell thunderstorm that had produced the EF4 tornado in Henryville, Indiana, and plenty of other tornadoes along its path. When this tornado developed and touched down near I-75, it was only 6 miles south of the terminal Doppler weather radar that serves the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport. The radar images we were able to get from the TCVG radar on this day were the kind of things that normally only the researchers out in the Great Plains with the Dopplers on wheels are able to pick up.
The reality of issuing warnings and tracking storms is knowing that human lives are being affected. Seth Bonneau says that's one of the most difficult parts of his job.
And you see it and you think, meteorologically, I've got a debris ball, that's debris. But when you step back and think about it from a human perspective and know that those are people's homes and livelihoods floating around that tornado, it's powerful.
Former Weather Channel meteorologist Kim Cunningham says her colleague Dr. Greg Forbes was in the midst of television coverage on March 2nd and 3rd. He knew how serious this outbreak would be and issued the highest alert for residents in parts of Kentucky.
He had come out with his TORCON a few years earlier than that, and that's a tornado condition index where he tries to give an idea of what the chances are that a tornado could hit you.
We've given a TORCON today of a 10. It's pretty much guaranteed there's going to be a tornado within 50 miles of you.
So that was like the second time he'd ever done that. So I know it was a terrible event.
The Torcon of 10 in Kentucky verified for those who lived in the towns of West Liberty and Salersville. They suffered widespread damage from the severe storms. There were 4 separate tornadoes that struck 9 different counties. The first tornado in recorded history affected Martin County, and it was the first occurrence of an EF2 or greater twister on record in Menifee, Magoffin, and Johnson counties.
There is a tornado on the ground, and looking at that radar signature, I'll tell you what, I just about bet my bottom dollar that that's the case, and it is headed right toward Morgan County. If you are in West Liberty, please get into a safe location. This is a life-threatening situation.
The tornado that hit West Liberty was on the ground for 86 miles. It continued into eastern Kentucky and western West Virginia. It was up to 1 mile wide as it tore through downtown.
Mark Walter is the current mayor of West Liberty, but at the time the town was hit by a tornado on March 2, 2012, he was serving on the city council. Mark and some neighbors were keeping tabs on the storm's track as it moved their way.
And we watched the news for warnings, and we noted that a tornado warning was coming from the neighboring county of Menifee. And as we watched the progression of the storm coming toward West Liberty, I actually looked out my home and saw cloud formations, and as we saw a wall of storm coming our way, we proceeded to go to the basement, and we noted that the storm went opposite us, which headed straight for the town of West Liberty. I am a volunteer fireman, and on the radio our county judge put an all-call out for all emergency personnel, and that the city of West Liberty had taken a direct hit, and there was casualties and entrapment, and that call comes out 3 times, which is a distress signal. And at that time, made a decision to head toward the hospital, which my father lived right next to the hospital, so I had 2 things to see if we had received damage at the hospital and at my father's house. Personally, I could not get there. Went back home and received a chainsaw and cut my way to the top of the hill for the road leading to the hospital. Found my father was fine, and then proceeded to the hospital to make sure they had enough personnel. And from that point, I went into the firefighter mode, I guess, and I went to the city of West Liberty, and we coordinated search and rescue at that time.
Not only was Mark Walter on the city council, he was also a registered nurse. And when the distress call came, he was ready to put his years of experience to work. He vividly remembers seeing how the town had changed in seconds after the twister roared through.
There was down power poles and power lines. Everything was completely dark. That was the first hazard. Then coming into town, you could not make it into the city of West Liberty because of down power lines. So I parked my vehicle and walked into downtown. And once I hit Main Street took the blunt of the storm. Actually, right at City Hall was the center of the storm. Came across from the hospital hill straight through West Liberty and down 460 on Prestonsburg Street. So what I saw looked like, literally, as you've heard other towns, it looked like a bomb had exploded. There were buildings, just laying in the road. Cars overturned right in front of our city hall. Was one of our police cars was on the side. We had the commercial bank. The part of the building was gone. And the first glance on the corner, I'm a member of the West Liberty United Methodist Church, and we would have celebrated a 100-year anniversary just 2 years later. And the roof was gone. Actually, the steeple was laying in the road of Route 7 and 519, which is the intersection there in West Liberty. And just unbelievable destruction is what I experienced.
No one died in West Liberty that afternoon, but many residents lost nearly everything they owned.
My own aunt was 79 years old and lived across the street from the hospital. And again, the hospital is on a hill overlooking the city of West Liberty. She took heed for the warning, walked down to the basement, and that's the last thing she remembers as she saw her house literally lifted and landed in the parking lot of the hospital. And on my initial trip to Wells Hill to the hospital, I went door to door to see if everyone's okay, and the neighbor let me know that my aunt was in his home, and I talked to her, and she was concerned about some things being missing. Of course, it was dark. We didn't know the extent of the destruction at that time. The next day, we found that her house was pretty much in shambles, and the majority of it lying in the parking lot of the hospital. And there's a long story there that we did find some things that made her happy. We found her wallet, and she said she had put her rings on the windowsill above the sink in the kitchen. And I just happened to look, and I saw something that looked like the window frame, and I bent down, and I had something, a stick that was, I was just kind of going through some debris. And I found 2 of those rings in that debris. And of course, I hoop and holler, and I let her know. We first found her wallet, we then found some rings, and she was able to find some shoes. And I said, "We've made this lady happy." We found her wallet that had her credit cards in it, and we found her some rings, and we found her some shoes, and we had to laugh because otherwise it was just overwhelming.
It was equally as overwhelming for the staff at the National Weather Service in Wilmington, Ohio. They had spent an intense day and evening issuing tornado warnings for their region. But after the storms left behind damage, they knew much more work would lie ahead. Seth Bonneau said it weighed heavily on his mind.
There was a part of the event where I felt out of control, that I didn't feel like we had the situation. It was after the event had happened, and the scope of it started to set in. We were tired. We had worked a very long 12-hour plus day, 14-hour day, and already the phone calls were coming in. When are you going to go survey? What are these tornadoes going to be rated? Do we have enough resources to cover these long tornado tracks and numerous reports of damage? And it became overwhelming, and you just wanted to stop and say, I can't do this anymore. My emotions, I'm exhausted, I'm spent, I need to collect myself before we address it, but you can't do that. So we needed to assemble our teams, and we have great people at this office that scurried around and formed teams, formed a game plan where we all collaborated and said, we need a team to go this place, we need a team to go this place. And once we got the teams identified in the areas that we needed to investigate, it all started to fill in. We got some great help from the Weather Service office in Cleveland, offering up some of their resources. So by midnight, we had a game plan. And now it was, got to go home, put these emotions to bed, because tomorrow is going to be 10 times as tough as today, because we got to go see that damage.
West Liberty, Kentucky Mayor Mark Walter had already seen the damage in his town. What he didn't expect was the incredible support from other communities who arrived to help.
Within a few hours, just in the emergency command post there, we set an emergency command post in the parking lot of the commercial bank. We had over 35 fire department and rescue squads here in our town. And that was just an unbelievable outpouring. And then in time, the people pulled together in our community, but the outpouring of people that came to our town was just unbelievable. And they came, if they did not come we're talking about church organizations, volunteer groups. We had supplies that came to us. We had truckloads of supplies came to us. We had a distribution area for those that have lost so much. We had people that the Index Church with Brother Mike Frisbee opened his church and community center for a receiving area for supplies. They cooked meals and shared with the volunteers that came. And it was just an unbelievable outpouring of the volunteers that came to help in this community.
It was a tornado outbreak of great magnitude. Even into the morning of March 3rd, additional tornadoes occurred in Charlotte and Harrisburg, North Carolina. That's where a 7-year-old boy was snatched from his bed and thrown 350 feet onto an interstate as the twister struck. He only suffered minor injuries. Another tornado produced EF3 damage in Lanier County, Georgia.
In all, there were more than 80 tornadoes, injuring 308 and claiming 41 lives. There were a number of communities that were impacted, but many of them, like West Liberty and Henryville, received an outpouring of support. Seth Bonneau with the National Weather Service traveled to a number of towns that sustained damage.
All those feelings of sadness and despair, and were so quickly replaced by feelings of uplift and power and human spirit, because you saw so many homes with so many people on the roofs putting blue tarp down or making piles of rubble. And the few people that I had the guts to talk to, because you have to imagine their emotional state, the few people I talked to said, I've got people on my roof, I don't even know who they are, but they're fixing my roof. And that theme was repeated numerous times through the day. I've got people serving me a sandwich, I don't know who they are. That's the human spirit. And so as the day went along and we looked at so much damage and talked to community partners and emergency management directors, and so many of them said the response is just tremendous. And you see that, and you see cars lined up for miles in these high damage zones, and it's all people helping out. And as tragic and terrible as the damage is, you see all that help and you think, there is good people.
Next on Tornado Talk, it has been 50 years since a deadly F4 tornado struck Oakland, Illinois on April 21st, 1967. More than 30 people were killed. 16 of those who lost their lives were stuck in rush hour traffic. Outbreak in Oakland on episode 33 of Tornado Talk.